Your ancestors didn't have ovens. They didn't have flour mills. They didn't have kitchens the way you understand them. But they survived winters that would kill most of us in 3 days. And one of the oldest survival skills you've never heard of is hidden in plain sight. In the trees around you, in the water you're throwing away, and in techniques so simple that modern people dismiss them as worthless. This is how people fed themselves for 10,000 years before bread became a commodity you buy wrapped in plastic from a stranger. And what I'm about to show you will change the way you think about food, survival, and what's actually possible with your own two hands. Let me start with something almost nobody knows. When an Amish family faces a true emergency, a storm that cuts them off from town, a harvest failure, or simply the middle of a winter where supplies run low, they don't panic about bread. They go to the forest. And what they harvest isn't grain at all. It's bark. Now, I can see your face right now. You're thinking I've lost my mind. Bark isn't food. But you're wrong, and that wrong thinking is exactly why this skill died. Before matches were invented in 1826, people carried fire starters made from flint and steel everywhere they went. Before grain became the center of human civilization, people survived on what the forest offered, and bark flour is one of the oldest survival foods on Earth. The inner bark of pine, birch, and spruce trees contains starches and sugars that kept northern communities alive through centuries of harsh winters when grain stores failed. It can be dried and ground into flour that, when mixed with water and cooked, becomes a porridge that's nutritionally complete and will sustain you for weeks. Here's how you do it. You find a young birch, pine, or spruce tree, and this is important, you're not killing the tree. You peel back a small section of outer bark, then you carefully separate the inner white layer from the wood underneath. This inner bark is what you want. You scrape it away with a flat stone or a piece of bone, and it comes off in sheets. Then you lay it on rocks in the sun to dry completely. This takes 3 to 4 days depending on your climate. Once it's dry and brittle, you break it into small pieces and grind it between 2 stones until it becomes flour. The whole process takes maybe 2 hours of actual work, spread across days. 1 handful of pine bark flour, and I mean 1 small handful, can be mixed with water and wild herbs to make a thick porridge that will feed 1 person for an entire day. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia used this technique for thousands of years. The Ainu of Japan used inner bark from the elm tree. Native Americans across the northern forests understood this so completely that they had specific trees they preferred and specific seasons when the bark was easiest to harvest. By the time European settlers arrived, this knowledge was already ancient. But bark flour isn't the only forgotten bread technique. There's something even more shocking that people in plain communities still practice, and it exists somewhere between bread and survival. It's called foraged grain flour, and it comes from wild plants that you can harvest in literally any field or meadow where grass grows. Cattail is one of the most remarkable plants on Earth. A single cattail plant provides food in multiple forms: seeds that can be ground into flour, roots that taste like a cross between potato and corn, and shoots that taste like zucchini when you boil them. The Iroquois understood this plant so completely that they had ceremonies around its harvest. What's wild is that a family living on the edge of a marshland or wetland can harvest enough cattail roots and seeds in a single week to make flour that will last them through the entire winter. 1 cattail plant can provide food, shelter material, fire starter, and wound dressing. It's not an exaggeration to say that knowing how to process cattails is a complete survival guarantee if you live anywhere near water. The process is strange and labor-intensive, but it works. You dig up the roots, and these are thick, starchy rhizomes that look almost like pale ginger. You wash them thoroughly, then you soak them in water. Here's where the magic happens. As they soak, the starch leaches out into the water, making it milky and thick. You let the sediment settle, carefully pour off the cloudy water into another container, and let that settle again. After a few hours, you have a layer of pure starch at the bottom. That starch is flour. It's not flour in the way wheat flour is flour, but when you mix it with water and a binding agent, egg, plant resin, or even rendered fat, it becomes a dough that can be cooked into flatbread. A single family working together can process enough cattail roots in an afternoon to create 2 weeks' worth of flatbread flour. The Amish community I visited in Lancaster County still teaches this to children as part of their everyday education. Not because they expect to need it next week, but because knowledge preservation is survival preparation. They understand something modern people have completely forgotten. If your supply chain breaks, if the trucks stop coming, if the power goes out for more than a few days, you need to know how to make bread from things that already exist in the landscape around you. There's another technique that's even older, and it survived in the Appalachian Mountains because poor communities had no choice but to keep using it. It's called ash bread. When you have fire, and you always have fire in a true survival situation, you can make bread without an oven, without flour, without almost anything. You take the inner bark of a tree, you roast it over direct flame until the outside is charred and the inside is soft, and then you roll it into a ball with rendered fat and any herbs you can find. The result tastes like a combination of nuts and earth, and it's nutritionally complete. More importantly, it's nearly impossible to ruin. Here's what kills me about this. For the last 100 years, we've been convinced that bread requires specific conditions, specific ingredients, and specific tools. The Industrial Bread Revolution told us that real bread comes from factories, that home baking is quaint but inefficient, that you should buy what you need instead of making it. And we believed that so completely that we've eliminated our own backup plans. We've made ourselves dependent on a system that's only been stable for 70 years. A blink in human history. A properly made forest bread, whether it's bark flour, cattail root flour, or ash bread, will keep for weeks if you dry it properly. It stores better than commercial bread. It has more nutrition. It costs literally nothing if you know where to look. And most importantly, it represents something that modern society has completely lost. The ability to feed yourself using only what you can touch and process with your own hands. In the old ways, and I mean the ways that kept people alive for thousands of years, bread wasn't something you relied on completely. It was one tool among many. You had fermented foods. You had dried meat. You had root cellars filled with vegetables that maintained a natural temperature of 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, without any electricity. You had preserved berries. You had nuts. You had fish that you'd smoked for months. Bread was the thing that made all of this mix together into actual meals. It was the vehicle for everything else. But there's something even more important here. When you learn to make bread from bark, from cattails, from what the forest offers, you're not just learning a backup plan. You're learning to see the world differently. You're learning to look at a meadow and see not just grass, but food. You're learning to look at a tree and see not just wood, but sustenance. This is exactly how people in plain communities think about their land. They don't see resources. They see possibility. They see everything around them as something that can be used, processed, preserved, and shared. The Amish teach their children this way of seeing when they're very young. They might not explicitly say, "Learn to make bread from bark," but they'll take a child on a walk and show them how to identify edible plants, how to understand which trees are best for different purposes, how to see abundance where someone from the city would see wilderness. This is education that modern schools have completely abandoned, and it's an education that would save your life if the systems we depend on failed for even a few weeks. Most people think survival skills are about being tough, about endurance, about physical hardship. But the real skill, the one that actually keeps you alive, is about knowledge. It's about knowing that if you're hungry and you're in a forest, you don't have to stay hungry. It's about understanding that bread isn't a packaged product. Bread is a technology. It's a way of transforming raw plant material into something digestible and stable. And once you understand that, you can make bread from almost anything. This is why I'm fascinated by the old knowledge. Not because I think the power grid is going to fail tomorrow, but because understanding it changes how you think about the world. When you know how to make flour from bark, when you understand that a single cattail plant can sustain you, when you've made ash bread over an open fire, you realize that scarcity is largely a story we tell ourselves. You realize that your ancestors weren't living in deprivation. They were living in abundance, just a different kind of abundance than we've been taught to recognize. The real value isn't in the bread itself. It's in the knowledge that you could, if you needed to, feed yourself without going to a store. That's freedom. That's resilience. And that's something that nearly every ancestor you had, going back thousands of years, understood as thoroughly as breathing. But here's where most people stop listening. They think, that's nice for a hobby. But I live in 2024. I have a job. I have bills. I can't spend my weekends grinding bark and making primitive bread. And you're right. You probably won't. But that's not the point. The Amish understand something that the rest of us have forgotten. The old skills aren't meant to replace your life. They're meant to expand your options. They're a foundation underneath everything else you do. And when you have that foundation, everything changes. I spent a week with a family in Lancaster County, not filming, just living alongside them. And what struck me wasn't how hard they work, it was how relaxed they were. Because they knew, with absolute certainty, that if the supply chain broke tomorrow, they would eat. They would stay warm, they would figure it out. That's not paranoia, that's peace of mind. Root cellars are one of the most underrated technologies humanity has ever invented. A proper root cellar maintains a temperature between 32 and 40 degrees year-round without any electricity. Not a refrigerator, not passive cooling, just the earth itself, doing exactly what it's been doing for millions of years. A family that maintains a root cellar can store root vegetables, potatoes, turnips, carrots, beets, for 8 months or longer. Apples keep for 6 months. Cabbages can last almost a year, and the method hasn't changed since the 1700s. You dig into the earth, build stone or brick walls, leave an opening for air circulation, and gravity and geology handle the rest. The reason this skill disappeared isn't that it stopped working. It's that we built electrical refrigerators, and we decided convenience was more valuable than resilience. And maybe it was, for a while. But the cost of that decision is that most people now believe food cannot be preserved without electricity. That's just not true. A spring house is another example. It's a small building built directly over a spring or cold stream, with water running through channels beneath shelves. The constant flow of cold water keeps food at a near refrigeration temperature naturally. Some spring houses have been in continuous operation for over 200 years. I've seen one built in 1847 that's still preserving milk, butter, and vegetables exactly as it did in the 19th century. These techniques work because they work with nature instead of against it. Modern food preservation works against nature. It uses electricity to force a cold environment where one doesn't naturally exist. That requires constant energy input, constant maintenance, and if the system fails, you have nothing. The old way works with what nature gives you. Underground cold, running water, evaporation, salt, smoke, fermentation, time. These are forces that have always existed. Your job isn't to create something new. Your job is to understand what's already there and use it. Smoking meat has been used for food preservation for over 7,000 years. The process works because smoke contains compounds that kill bacteria and fungi, and it dries the outer surface of the meat, which prevents the growth of microorganisms. A properly smoked ham can last for months without refrigeration. Some smoked meats can last for years. The Amish smoke ham, bacon, sausage, and beef. They do it the same way their ancestors did, over hardwood fires in dedicated smokehouses. The flavor is incomparable to anything from a store, and the preservation is complete. A smoked ham hanging in a cool room can feed a family for weeks. But here's what most people don't understand. You can't just throw meat on any fire and expect it to work. The temperature matters. The type of wood matters. The humidity matters. The airflow matters. The timing matters. This isn't primitive guesswork. It's a science that was refined over thousands of years. The Amish have entire systems. They know which woods produce the best flavor. Hickory, oak, applewood. They know that softwoods like pine will leave a bitter taste. They understand temperature control without thermometers, by the color of the smoke, by the feel of the heat, by experience. A man who's been smoking meat for 40 years doesn't need to check a temperature gauge. He knows. This brings us back to something fundamental. Knowledge is a survival skill. Not facts, not trivia, but practical knowledge. The kind that lives in your hands, not in your head. When someone asks me, what's the most important survival skill? They're usually expecting me to say fire starting or water purification. But the real answer is observation. It's the ability to look at your environment and understand what it can provide. A man in the forest who can identify 50 edible plants will never starve. A woman who understands how to read the weather by watching clouds and wind patterns will never be caught unprepared. A person who knows how to navigate by stars, by moss on trees, by the sun's position, will never be truly lost. The pioneers who crossed the continent didn't have GPS. They had the ability to observe. They knew that moss tends to grow on the north side of trees, not always, but often enough to be useful as one data point among many. They knew that certain birds fly toward water at dusk. They understood that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, And from that alone, you can orient yourself anywhere on Earth. These aren't tricks. They're not shortcuts. They're the basic literacy of being alive on this planet. And they're things you can learn in an afternoon, but they take a lifetime to master. Water purification is one skill that separates survival from suffering. And while we've developed sophisticated modern methods, the basic principles are ancient and incredibly simple. Boiling water kills most pathogens. A fire, a container, and time. That's all you need. But boiling requires fuel, and fuel can be scarce. So our ancestors developed layering methods. Sand filters particles. Charcoal absorbs chemicals and improves taste. Cloth catches larger debris. Clay can be shaped into vessels. Gravity does the work. A person with access to sand, charcoal, and cloth can purify water that would otherwise be unsafe to drink. Birch bark is one of the most useful natural materials. It's naturally waterproof due to oils in the bark. A container can be folded from birch bark in minutes, and it will hold water. The Ojibwe people made baskets, canoes, and containers from birch bark that lasted for years. But here's the thing about using natural materials. It's not about being primitive. It's about understanding what's available and using it efficiently. A person who can fold a waterproof container from bark is solving a problem using materials at hand. That's not less sophisticated than plastic bottles. That's more sophisticated because it's sustainable, it requires no supply chain, and it works without electricity. This is where the old knowledge becomes dangerous to modern thinking. Because the moment you realize you can purify water without modern technology, the moment you fold a container from bark and it actually holds water, the moment you start a fire without matches, your relationship to the world changes. You stop being helpless. You stop being dependent. You stop being afraid. Navigation without GPS is a skill that's been lost almost entirely in one generation, but it's not hard to recover. The North Star, Polaris, is visible in the northern hemisphere nearly every clear night. Once you can find it, you have direction. You have orientation. You're no longer lost. The method is simple. Find the Big Dipper constellation. The two stars at the end of the dipper point toward the North Star. Once you locate it, you have true north. From there, you can orient east, west, and south. That knowledge alone is enough to prevent being lost in the wilderness. But our ancestors didn't have compasses either. They used the sun. The sun rises in the east, reaches its highest point in the south, in the northern hemisphere, and sets in the west. That's true every single day. A person who knows this will never be directionally confused. Shadows point. A stick stuck in the ground casts a shadow that moves. The tip of the shadow traces the sun's path. In the morning, the shadow points west. At noon, it points north. In the evening, it points east. This is observation that a child can understand and remember for life. The reason these skills matter, the real reason, is that they create a different relationship between you and the world. When you know you can make fire, you're not afraid of cold. When you know you can find water and purify it, you're not afraid of thirst. When you understand plants, you're not afraid of hunger. And it's not that you'll necessarily ever need to do these things. It's that the knowledge removes a baseline anxiety that most modern people carry unconsciously. We feel dependent. We feel vulnerable. We feel like if the systems fail, we'll die. And that feeling, whether it's rational or not, shapes how we live. The Amish don't worry about power outages. They live without electricity by choice, and that choice is built on knowledge. They know how to heat their homes, with wood stoves that require no electricity. They know how to cook, on cast iron over fire or on propane stoves. They know how to preserve food. They know how to deliver babies safely at home. They know how to treat illnesses with herbs and traditional medicine. Is their medicine as advanced as modern medicine? In some cases, no. But in most cases, the common cold, digestive issues, wounds, minor infections, herbal remedies work. And they work without requiring a pharmacist, a doctor, and a supply chain. Plantain, a common weed most people ignore, has been used for wound healing for thousands of years. The leaves contain compounds that reduce inflammation and promote healing. A person who knows this can use a plant growing in their yard to treat cuts and scrapes more effectively than leaving a wound to air dry. Willow bark tea has been used for pain relief and fever reduction since ancient times. Modern aspirin is derived from salicylic acid, which is found naturally in willow bark. Before aspirin was synthesized in a factory, people drank willow bark tea. It worked then, it works now. This is not superstition. This is not alternative medicine versus real medicine. This is recognizing that plants have been used medicinally for longer than written history, and many of them genuinely work. Modern medicine has extracted and concentrated the active compounds, which is useful, but you don't need the extraction. You don't need the concentration. You just need the plant. And the beautiful part? The plant grows around you, asking nothing of you except the knowledge to recognize it. An herb garden is one of the most valuable things a person can maintain, not for show, not for aesthetics, for actual medicine and actual flavor and actual resilience. A small herb garden, perhaps 20 feet by 20 feet, can provide nearly all the medicinal and culinary herbs a family needs for a year. Dried properly, stored correctly, they last through winter and into spring. This isn't a hobby. This is healthcare and food security. The Amish maintain herb gardens as a matter of course. Children learn which plants treat which ailments before they're teenagers. By adulthood, they have the knowledge their mothers had and their mothers' mothers had, going back generations. This is what we're losing, not just the individual skills, fire, water, shelter, food, but the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. A child who watches their parent make medicine from plants doesn't just learn botany. They learn that knowledge is passed down. They learn that the old ways work. They learn respect for the natural world. When that transmission breaks, when a generation grows up in suburbs with no connection to growing things, to killing things for food, to preserving what's grown, something essential is lost. Not just information, but identity. Not just skills, but understanding. I don't think we need to go back to 1850. I don't think electricity is evil or that modern medicine is a mistake. But I do think we've thrown away something valuable, and we're only now starting to realize the cost. Every skill your ancestors had, from fire starting to herb gathering to navigation by stars, was learned through practice and repetition. It became second nature. It became part of how they moved through the world. And because it was practiced, because it was normal, it never felt burdensome. It was just life. Metalworking is another lost skill that the Amish have maintained. A blacksmith can shape iron into tools, hardware, hinges, and implements entirely by hand. No electricity required. Just knowledge of how metal behaves when heated, how force can be applied, how the work hardens and cools. A good blacksmith can make nails, horseshoes, gate hinges, and 100 other things that most of us have to buy. And the knowledge hasn't changed in 500 years. The techniques are the same. The tools are virtually identical. But the point isn't that you need to become a blacksmith. The point is that it's possible. It's learnable. It's not magic. It's not beyond reach. It's just knowledge combined with practice. That's the entire thesis of what we're discussing. Nothing that your ancestors did is beyond your ability to learn. Not because you're special, not because you're particularly capable, but because humans are capable of learning these things. We've done it for thousands of years. We're built for it. The barrier isn't ability, it's intention. It's priority. It's deciding that knowing how to do something is worth the time investment, even if you might never need it. And that's where we stand right now. We have knowledge available to us that previous generations would have killed for. We have YouTube videos explaining knot tying. We have written guides on water purification. We have access to the same information that kept entire communities alive through harsh winters and lean years. But knowledge sitting in a video, untouched and unused, does nothing for you. It's just data. Useless data. Your ancestors didn't learn these skills by watching. They learned by doing. They learned because their survival depended on it. They learned because there was no alternative. They learned because someone older than them, someone they trusted, showed them exactly how it was done and then watched them do it wrong 50 times until they got it right. That repetition, that failure, that coaching, that's what transferred the skill, not the explanation. The doing. So when you watch this video and think, that's interesting, I should learn that someday, you're making the same choice modern people have been making for 100 years. And someday never comes. Someday is where all the good intentions go to die. But what if you picked one skill? Just one. Not all of them. Not some ambitious list of 15 different techniques that you'll never finish. One skill. Something that genuinely interests you. Something that makes you curious. Fire starting, maybe. Water purification. Knot tying. Food preservation. shelter building, foraging, herbal medicine. Pick the one that actually calls to you. The one you find yourself thinking about when you're washing dishes or driving to work. And then commit to learning it properly. Not through a single video, through multiple sources, through practice, through failure, through teaching someone else what you've learned, because that's when you truly know if you understand it. That's the difference between information and skill. That's the difference between knowing about something and knowing how to do something. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The moment you master one skill, the moment you can do it without thinking, without a guide, without second-guessing yourself, something shifts inside you. You realize that you're capable of more than you thought. You realize that the gap between knowing and doing is just practice. And then the next skill becomes easier to learn, and the one after that. Your ancestors didn't wake up knowing everything. They learned one thing at a time. They failed. They tried again. They became competent because they made the decision to become competent. The Amish and plain communities around us understand something that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. They understand that competence in basic survival isn't optional. It's not a hobby. It's not something you do if you have time. It's foundational. It's like knowing how to read and write. It's baseline human literacy in the language of survival. When you watch an Amish family move through their day, they're not doing anything exotic. They're not performing. They're not thinking about it, they're just living. They can start a fire without matches because they've done it 1,000 times. They can preserve food without electricity because that's how you preserve food. They can navigate without GPS because they learned direction the way humans learned it for millennia. They didn't choose to learn these things because they were worried about some future scenario. They learned them because it's how you live. It's how you feed your family. It's how you keep warm. It's how you solve problems without waiting for a delivery truck or a customer service line. And that's available to you too. Not in the same way. You're not going to abandon electricity tomorrow. You're not going to move to a rural community. But you can adopt the principle. You can decide that knowing how to do fundamental things matters. You can practice, you can build competence. Because here's what happens when you get good at one of these skills. You're not more afraid, you're less afraid. When you know you can start a fire, the fear of being cold goes down. When you know you can purify water, the anxiety about drinking from a questionable source decreases. When you can identify edible plants, you stop being paralyzed by the what-if of starvation. Competence is the antidote to fear, and the world has been slowly removing opportunities for people to develop competence in anything practical. Everything is outsourced. Everything is purchased. Everything is done by somebody else. And people have never felt more helpless. Your great-grandparents weren't fearless. They weren't special. They were just competent. They were just skilled. They just knew how to do the things they needed to do. And that knowledge removed the anxiety. You can have that too. It's not mysterious. It's not locked behind some secret door. It's just waiting for you to decide that it matters enough to learn. So here's what I want you to do. Don't try to learn everything at once. Don't make a list of 20 skills and burn yourself out in the first week. Pick one. The one that genuinely interests you. The one you'd actually like to be good at. And then spend the next 30 days learning it. Really learning it. Not watching videos. Practicing. Getting your hands dirty. Failing and trying again. Because at the end of those 30 days, you won't just know about this skill, you'll know how to do it. And that changes things. That changes how you see yourself. That changes what you believe is possible. And then, when you're ready, you learn the next one, and the one after that. That's how you reclaim what your ancestors knew. That's how you become the capable person you're actually capable of being. Not all at once, one skill at a time, one decision at a time. This is what the forgotten roots teach us. Not that you need to go backward. Not that electricity is evil or that modern life is wrong, but that competence in fundamental skills isn't something to abandon. It's something to return to. It's something to honor. And the good news is, it's never too late to start. Your great-grandparents would recognize exactly what you're doing. They'd see you learning to start a fire and know that you're rejoining a lineage of people who could survive anything because they knew how to do the essential things. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know these topics matter to you because you're still here, still learning, still asking the question of what your ancestors knew. If you found this helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new upload. We release new survival skills and forgotten techniques every week, and I don't want you to miss a single one. The knowledge of our ancestors is waiting for you. one skill at a time.